The Hilton sale is on. Now through September 29th, you can save up to 20% on stays this fall and beyond. Long weekends, last-minute getaways, holiday gatherings. There's a Hilton stay for all of them. More moments, more experiences, more destinations. Now 20% off for a limited time because it matters where you stay. Don't wait. Book by September 29th and save up to 20% at Hilton.com. Terms apply. Hilton for the stay.
This episode is brought to you by Nespresso and Samra Origins by the Weekend Coffee Collection.
Introducing Samra Origins. My collaboration with Nespresso is a connection to my roots, to my mother, Samra. Coffee that hits the right notes. It transports you. Crafted with unique notes and bold, soaring flavors. Experience a taste that moves you. Nespresso and Samra Origins.
Discover more at Nespresso.com.
This is the Tudors, Dynasty, and Beyond podcast. History with a twist. And now your host, Rebecca Larson.
Hello and welcome back to the show. I'm your host, Rebecca Larson, and today I am very excited to welcome to the show David Woodman. Welcome.
Thank you very much for having me.
You know, I got your book a little while ago, and I've always been fascinated with like Alfred the Great. And when I saw your book was coming out, I thought, oh, this is an interesting topic because this is a person in history I don't know very much about. And that's why I invited you on the show, because I figured my listeners are probably in the same boat as I am. So
yeah, absolutely. Absolutely. I think that's exactly the reason I wanted to write the book, actually, Rebecca. I mean, of all of the early medieval kings that people think about, Alfred the Great is the number one person. And actually Æthelstan, he's lost from view, and it's such a shame. He's the person who formed England in the first place. So I was really, inspired to write about him for that very reason.
Yes. Okay. So I'm going to start off with we're going to go back to Alfred the Great, basically, since I mentioned that that's who his father is. And he is obviously Alfred the Great is much celebrated. How does looking at Alfred's legacy help us understand the world Æthelstan inherited?
Yeah, very good question. So Alfred the Great, he was ruling in the 870s through to the 890s. He's Æthelstan's grandfather. The kingdom is beset by Viking raids, and Alfred really has to pivot quite a lot to think about, how can he protect the kingdom against the Viking raids, and he does various things. Of course, he fights them, he tries to pay them off, he tries to convert the Vikings to Christianity, and one of the things he does, which is really, really interesting and quite unique, is that he begins to think about an internal polity that is greater than just the kingdom of Wessex. So he was king of Wessex, but there were other kingdoms within England as well at that point. So Mercia, East Anglia, and Northumbria. And Alfred joins together Wessex and Mercia, and he creates something called the Kingdom of the Anglo-Saxons for the first time. So he sees the value in this internal cohesion in the face of this external threat of the Vikings. So I think that's a major idea that is left from Alfred's reign into the reign of his grandson Æthelstan, and something that really must have inspired Æthelstan when he was thinking about growing the polity even further. And I think that was really an important precedent for him.
Let's talk a little bit about who Æthelstan's father was too, because I just mentioned Alfred the Great was his grandfather, but who was his dad?
Yeah, his father is a person called Edward the Elder, so the son of Alfred, and Edward was an interesting person in his own right. Again, someone who's a bit lost from view in historical records. He was married 3 times, and Æthelstan was his eldest son by his first wife, a lady called Edwin, rather wonderful names from the early medieval period. And he had, because he had 3 wives in total, he had quite a large number of half brothers and half sisters, who would be important in various ways to Æthelstan later in his reign.
What kind of ruler was Edward?
Oh, good question. So Edward was somebody who was very preoccupied by the military aspects of being an early medieval king. So what we see in Edward's reign from early in 900 right the way through to 924 and his death is a king who's trying to solidify Mercia, his hold over Mercia. So he creates this amazing set of fortified strongholds. The Old English term for a fortified stronghold is a burh. And there's this incredible network of burhs that's formed in Mercia by Edward and by his sister, someone called Æthelflæd, who's the Lady of the Mercians, and a very interesting character in her own right. And they create this network of burhs, but both in terms of protection to protect those living in Mercia and in Wessex from Viking attacks, but also as a way of sort of solidifying their control over these areas. So Edward was very preoccupied with that and did a really good job of sort of bringing back bits of, I guess, the Midlands, the East, and a bit in the north, places that had been heavily settled by Vikings just prior to his reign.
I think I read in your book that Æthelstan was raised in Mercia, wasn't he?
Yeah, exactly right. So although he was born into the royal house of Wessex, we think at about the time that Edward, his father, was married for a second time. So about the year 900, he's sent to Mercia, sent away from the royal court. You can see why, and he's brought up, we think, by his aunt Æthelflæd and her husband Æthelred, Lord of the Mercians, and they would have sent a very important example for Æthelstan. They with their creation of burhs and Æthelflæd, just a word on her, actually, because it's so rare that we get, such detailed evidence about a female figure from the early medieval period, which suggests that she must have been an extraordinary leader in her own right. The main contemporary narrative text that we have for the early 10th century is something called the Anglo-Saxon Chronicle. It survives in different versions, and one version focuses almost entirely on her actions and her deeds. So she must have been a very, very interesting and important person.
I'm fascinated by her. I think she is so interesting. And I can't imagine having been raised by her, having been raised by Æthelflæd. And of course, I'm sure he wasn't really fully raised by her. There were probably other people around. But did that influence him at all on looking at female rulership?
Yeah, I think he definitely. It's a really good point, actually, Rebecca. And I think he definitely saw the importance of female rulership in various ways. I mentioned that he had quite a number of half sisters. One of the ways in which his reign is very, very important is that he's probably one of the first English kings that we see developing a concerted European policy, a foreign policy. So looking out towards Europe, trying to situate his royal house within the context of what's going on in early 10th century Europe. And he marries some of his half sisters into these contemporary European ruling houses, places like West Francia, East Francia, and Burgundy. And once these half-sisters are deployed into these diplomatic marriages, these political marriages, they become very influential in the European setting and very important for Æthelstan. So yeah, I think he absolutely understood the importance of female rulership.
I love her. I don't know. There's just something about her that it's one of those, if you could travel back in time and be a fly on the wall somewhere, where would you want to go? And she is one of those times in history that I would love just to observe her.
Yeah, I completely agree. Yeah, we'd love to know more about her actually as well.
Yeah. Well, now I have to ask you kind of a silly question, but have you watched The Last Kingdom?
Oh, I'm afraid I haven't watched The Last Kingdom, which I probably shouldn't admit.
No.
No, I haven't.
I think, the popular culture and all these films and TV series that come out really influence the viewers to learn about this time in history. Yeah. Normally, like we talk about the Tudors a lot on this show. And of course, Showtime's The Tudors was really that thing that got people into that time period. And so when The Last Kingdom came out, I knew who Alfred the Great was. I knew a little bit, but being able to see it acted out on screen, it just brings these people to life. But I always say we always have to remember that it's for entertainment, that usually it's not based off of fact, is it?
Yeah, but I think you're absolutely right. I think there's huge importance of bringing attention to the period, via the popular, the popular imagination like that. So yes, I mean, I really should watch it. Is the answer.
It's really good. I think it's really good. Let's talk about Æthelstan coming to the throne. What did it look like after his father died?
Yeah, it's a bit difficult to reconstruct actually. So his father dies. Edward dies in 924. And some versions of that contemporary text I mentioned, the Anglo-Saxon Chronicle, just straightforwardly relate that Athelstan takes over, that he becomes king. But other versions talk about the fact that one of his half-brothers, a man called Elfweard, may have been king as well. So we begin to think that actually there might have been a little bit of a period of joint kingship between the two, that actually Athelstan may have taken over in Mercia in the first place, and then actually that his half-brother Elfweard was king in Wessex. Now, if that were the case, that they had shared the kingship in some ways, very soon afterwards, Elfweard dies. So only a couple of weeks later, the Chronicle records that he's dead, and Athelstan becomes the sole king. And actually, just last week, I was at a very wonderful event at Kingston upon Thames to celebrate the 1100th anniversary of Athelstan's coronation. There was an interesting talk by Tom Holland where he suggested that maybe Elfweard had been disposed of in some way. We don't have any kind of contemporary record about it. There's nothing that says that. But he said, isn't it a bit suspicious that he dies very quickly? And I guess it is. Yeah.
It kind of reminds me of the sons of Henry the First. Mysterious deaths in the woods. Wasn't that convenient?
Yeah, and you can read how much you want into the Chronicles entry, which is just says straightforwardly that he dies only a couple of weeks later. There's a lot of things unsaid there, I think.
How unusual, or not unusual, I guess, was it to have two kings ruling at the same time?
Well, not unusual at this point. So before Alfred the Great and before Edward and then Athelstan come to power, the English kingdoms are there are several independent kingdoms, that the main areas being Wessex, Mercia, East Anglia, and Northumbria. So very common for that to happen. After Athelstan's death, England fragments once more, and we get a series of different kings in different places. We may come on to that. So not unusual, and I guess what you do see when the kingdom breaks down is it does do that along the sort of traditional political boundary between Wessex and Mercia. So not that surprising, I think.
Okay, yeah. Well, by the time we get to the Tudors, there's no way there would be any shared throne. I am curious because I feel like when it comes to Alfred the Great, he had an impact on education, didn't he?
He did, yeah, absolutely. So one of the I guess famous effects of the Viking raids was a sort of depletion of resource and learning, that they destroyed various churches around the kingdom. And Alfred, in a series of texts that are attributed to him, or in which he's writing a preface to them, talks about the fact that learning has got so bad that no one this side of the River Humber can read Latin. So he tries to put in place a sort of program of revival. And he founds a school at his court, what he calls a school, not a school as we would understand it, but a facility for training, I guess, young nobles in education. So he puts a huge emphasis on learning, a sponsorship of education, and that's what we see with Athelstan too. And again, it's a way in which Athelstan has been overlooked. Not many people talk about this aspect of his reign, but there are very, very interesting things going on. I mean, one of the things that happens, for example, is one very striking thing is he forms England in 927 for the first time. And one of the very first things we see him doing is commissioning a poet to write a poem to celebrate this occasion. And they were in a place called Aymont Bridge in the northwest of England, near to modern Penrith. And this poet writes these wonderful verses back to Winchester to say, look what's happened. Athelstan has now created what he calls Saxonia, the Saxon land, by which he means England. And he talks about Athelstan being glorious through his deeds. So very striking that at this really important political moment, he's commissioning a poet. It's a poet who's doing this. So yes, Athelstan continues Alfred's legacy. And in fact, actually, another very interesting aspect of his sponsorship of learning is that in Athelstan's court, we think it was, the place where we have one of the earliest interactions with the game of chess, an Indian game in origin, taking place. We get this manuscript depiction of a board game, which seems to show a variety of similarities with chess. So fascinating, I think.
Oh, I love chess. Now I feel like this is going to be my little piece of trivia with my friends. They already think I'm a nerd, so now I'll be like, oh, speaking of chess, did you know? I'm also curious, too, when it comes to religion, what did religion look like at this time? Was it as divided as it later became in the 16th century?
Well, Athelstan himself was a deeply pious Christian individual. So he's renowned and celebrated for his collection of copies of the Gospels, for example, which he then gave to various different ecclesiastical communities across English territory. He was also celebrated for his collection of relics, so famous relics, Christian relics, also relics of secular rulers too. So much so that people in Europe, when they're trying to attract his favor, they send someone over with a bag of relics, basically, to say, come and join us and join our
Like
cause.
like a bag, a big old
Yeah,
sack full
exactly.
of
A swag bag of relics. So yes, he himself is very pious, but the picture within the English kingdom is probably complicated. I mean, I imagine that most people would have been Christian, but there was a degree of diversity in terms of religious belief. By the early 10th century, there's been a large amount of Scandinavian settlement. We can imagine in origin Vikings had pagan belief systems, so it's complex, and that's also telling us a lot about the difficulties that Athelstan faced in trying to foster this idea of a kingdom of the English and one people. I mean, people had all sorts of backgrounds in the early 10th century within England, and some people would have bought into his vision, and I guess other people wouldn't, and that's the reality.
Okay, this may seem like a silly question, but obviously I'm American, so I don't know all of English history. And while I was reading your book, I was like, when did the term England become what it was called?
Yeah, no, it's a really good question. So I think off the top of my head, the first use of the word England, and in Old English it's Englerland, is in the early 11th century, so it's a bit later.
Mm.
So basically, what we're seeing in the early 10th century is a growing awareness of one people, the English people, and actually one of the first uses of that term dates to the reign of King Alfred the Great, so his grandfather. So
Oh,
we were talking earlier about this idea of the kingdom of the Anglo-Saxons that his grandfather creates, but
yeah.
it's in text from Alfred's court that he starts saying, well, we're one English people, we're the Anglecoon in Old English, the English people, and that's an idea. And again, if we're thinking about the legacy from Alfred to Athelstan, I think picks up that idea and really runs with it.
Yeah. Okay, so correct me if I'm mistaken here because I was really absorbing a lot of information in your book that was unfamiliar to me. But
Cool.
I think you mentioned that Ethelstan intentionally did not marry.
Well, we don't know.
Okay.
Yeah, we don't know. There's been lots of speculation about. So a very striking feature of his reign is that as you say, he remains unmarried and he doesn't have, at least we don't think he has any children. And there's been a range of hypotheses put forward. One of which is about his sexuality. Was he gay? That's one theory that's been put forward by Sarah Foote, who was another biographer of Athelstan. But one of the texts of the early 12th century, a very famous early 12th century writer called William of Malmesbury, he says, well, actually, one reason why this didn't happen was that he had so many half brothers that the succession would have been very complicated if he himself had also married and had further children. And for me, that's as good a suggestion as any, as close as we'll get, I think, to a reason why Athelstan remained unmarried. We just don't have the details from contemporary sources.
Was there something about the fact that he may have had a daughter?
Yes, yes, absolutely. So again from the early 12th century, there's a text from Ely which talks about a relic that had been given, and the text says from the daughter of Athelstan, but the name that it uses is the same name as one of his half sisters. So because there's no other reference to that name as being his daughter, we think it's just an error on the part of that person who was working in Ely in the 12th century.
I have to know, how difficult is it to research this time period?
Well, I have to say, I think it's very difficult in some ways. I mean, if you're confronted by many gaps in the chronology and the basic details of what's going on. The texts are all written from a particular perspective. They all have an agenda and a bias, which you have to try and understand before you can use the details that they contain. So really, really challenging. In fact, so challenging that, if you think about a biography of I'm sure with a Tudor king, you can go through in chronological order and from the childhood onwards, and you can reconstruct in quite good detail what's going on with the Tudor monarch. Well, not so with Athelstan. I mean, you simply couldn't do it like that. So you have to divide it up into the main themes of his reign, And once you do that, actually, it unlocks a lot, and you can then say an awful lot about the king, and the kind of ambition that he had, the kind of vision that he had, and for Athelstan, there's just so much. So it becomes a wonderful topic. But actually, by the end of the exercise, I have to say, when I finished writing about him, I was very struck that there's so much that you just don't know about the basics. What did he look like?
Yeah.
What did he eat? What kind of person was this? And again, we're left to sort of make estimations on the basis of contemporary works, but that's about it.
Well, you call him the first king of England. Is that the popular title, or are you rare in this?
I think I think it's pretty well accepted now that he's got the best claim to be the first king of England. I mean, as with much about academic history, people argue in various ways, and there are different opinions about that, and some people might point, for example, to the reign of one of his successors in the late 10th century, a man called Edgar the Peacemaker. But for me, and the reason they would do that is that when Athelstan dies, the kingdom sort of breaks down a bit, and Vikings come back to rule in York. But for me, just because it breaks down after his death doesn't mean that, it's he didn't create it in the first place. And actually, he was so sort of ahead of his times, I think, in terms of the political vision, what he was trying to achieve, that in a way it would have been more surprising if if it had stayed together once he died.
Yeah. So often I think we look at William the Conqueror as the first king of England. And I know you talk in your book about this big battle. So, William the Conqueror had the Battle of Hastings. What was the battle that really defined Athelstan's kingship?
Yeah, well, it happened in 937, so towards the end of his reign. And I think for a king to have been so successful and to have expanded in territorial terms in the way that he did, he must have built up people must have resented him, by the end of his reign. They were frustrated by his authority and his ambitions. And sure enough, what we see is that a Viking coalition, which included this person, Olaf Guthferthson, the Viking king in Dublin. It included the king of the Scots, Constantine II, and it included a king from the northwest in Strathclyde in Cumbria called Owen, came together, and they fought Athelstan at this battle in 937 called the Battle of Brunanburh. And a frustrating thing about the Battle of Brunanburh is the original Old English place name, but for generations, historians have sort of argued or grappled with the question about where was Brunanburh. We don't even know for sure, and I think there's sort of about 50 suggestions that have been put forward. But the poem suggests that Athelstan and his half-brother Edmund, they had to leave Wessex to fight this battle. The sort of traditional interpretation is that it took place in the northwest on the Wirral at a place called Bromborough on the Wirral. And for me, that's the best suggestion. I think that's the most likely interpretation. That if you can imagine a Viking coalition, Vikings coming over from Dublin, teaming up with the King of the Scots, teaming up with the northwestern king from Strathclyde and Cumbria, Athelstan and Edmund having to leave Wessex, it's probably a place in the northwest that they took this battle.
English history is so fascinating to me. You guys are so lucky to have such a rich history.
Yeah, we do, and actually, I mean, it's so rich that on this occasion, and another reason why we know the battle is so important is that contemporary chronicles from Ireland, Wales, Scotland, and Scandinavia, they all record the outcome. They're all registering with interest what's going on. And it's clear that, had he lost that day, the England that he created would have been broken.
Yeah, yeah. I feel like I am of Viking descent, so I am so sorry.
We won't hold you accountable, Rebecca.
Æthelstan is just fascinating to me, and I'm so glad that you wrote this book about him. And it's something that I really want my listeners and my viewers to dive into, because I feel like with history, it's always good to go back and look what shaped the people that we study, like the Tudors. What impact do you think Æthelstan and, let's say, the 9th and 10th century may have had on the Tudors?
Oh, on the Tudors, I'm not sure. I mean, one thing that does happen during the Tudor period is that there are a number of scholars, and particularly during the religious crises that's happening under Henry VIII, a number of scholars look for justification for what's going on. in early English texts. So a variety of Anglo-Saxon texts, early medieval texts, sorry, become very important, and they're trawled over by various different people. So I think at that stage, yes, early medieval English history did become, very formative in the Tudor imagination. It's not a subject I'm at all an expert on, but it's very, very interesting. And they talk about where did the church come from? How was it formed in the first place? And these are the records. I mean, these are some of the earliest records that we have of our country's history, and that's why they're so vital, throughout history and in the 16th century.
It's so amazing that some of these records still survive. It blows my mind.
Oh, it's wonderful. I mean, for me, it's the best part of my job, to be honest, going to the British Library and sitting with a 10th century manuscript. I mean, it's fantastic.
I can only imagine. I went to England last June and I got to sit with a copy, but a contemporary copy of Henry VIII's will. And I thought that was just the neatest thing ever. But I can't imagine sitting down with a document as old as the things that you're looking at.
Yeah, you definitely handle it carefully. You're very aware of what's in front of you.
Yeah. Well, David, I wanted to keep this interview a little bit shorter because it's like I want it to be a teaser for my listeners and I want them to go out and buy your book. And so I want to end with kind of a fun question. Every once in a while, I like to do something a little bit more fun. If you could invite either Alfred the Great or Æthelstan to dinner, who would you choose and why?
I'm always looking for ways to show my cat how much I love her. And with Fancy Feast Gems, I can pamper her whenever I want with a savory gravy on top of a gourmet mousse pâté. The pyramid shape makes serving simple, so all I have to do is peel and plate to make mealtime feel extra fancy. And with 2 entrees in every pack, it's easy to turn every day into the extraordinary. Fancy Feast Gems.
This episode is sponsored by Friskies, who would like to tell your cats hi. Now, if that didn't get your cat's attention, there is one thing that always does the trick. Just pour some Friskies crunchy food in the bowl and you'll hear those paws come running. Works every time. With so many Friskies choices, you can always bring your cats running from their secret napping spots. There's always more to explore. See for yourself at friskies.com or visit your local store.
Well, I mean, I'm very biased, I'm afraid. So I would have to choose Æthelstan. And I would want to know all about, his ambitions and what he'd wanted to achieve and his vision for England and how he made it come to fruition. So for Æthelstan for me.
Yeah. I wonder if he had a good sense of humor. Those are the things I think of.
Yeah, exactly. I wish that we knew.
Yes. Oh, David. Okay. So your book is called The First King of England. I don't remember the second part of the title.
Oh, Æthelstan and the Birth of a Kingdom.
There we go. And it's out now, right? So people can go out and purchase it.
Out now, exactly. Yes.
Oh, it's a wonderful book. I highly recommend it. I will include links in the show notes so people can buy them or buy it, I guess. Is there going to be an audiobook available? Do you know?
Yeah, they're just working on the audiobook now, and I think a link should be up there soon to pre-order. So.
Oh, did you voice it?
I didn't voice it, no.
That seems to be the new thing now, authors voicing their own books, but it's a lot of work to do an audiobook.
I imagine it is a lot of work. Yeah, absolutely.
David, thank you so much for joining us today. This has been so much fun chatting with you.
An enormous pleasure. Thanks for having me.
Thanks for listening to Tudors, Dynasty, and Beyond. If you enjoyed the episode, please take a moment to follow or subscribe wherever you're listening so you never miss a new release. And if you loved it, leave a quick review. It helps more history lovers find the show. Want to support the podcast and get bonus content? Head to patreon.com/tudorsdynasty. You can also find the link in the show notes of this episode. Join the conversation with Rebecca on social media at Tudors Dynasty. Until next time.